streaming countrywide on Prime Media Plus
on DSTV channel 885
and across the city
on 567 AM.
Well, it's time for The Naked Scientist with Dr. Chris Smith, a lecturer at the University of Cambridge, also well-known naked scientist, joining us once again to answer all your questions in a variety of science-related questions. Chris, a very good morning to you and welcome back to the show.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I am good. It is Friday, so,
Well, this automatically injects the week with a super dose of feel-good factor, doesn't it? So, happy Friday, everybody.
I suppose the happy hormones are there. Chris, in South Africa, we've had a whole lot of pastors who've claimed to actually be able to raise people from the dead. But I've got a question here from Alan, and he says, for Chris, people sometimes talk about having been declared dead and then coming back from that with having seen bright lights, etc. Is that absolutely possible?
Our definition of dead varies from one institution, one organisation to another. If we take the definition of dead that a doctor in a post-mortem room would say dead, then no. There's no evidence you can bring people back from that sort of circumstance. But there are some exceptional circumstances where people have effectively been dead for a while and have been resuscitated, because one definition of being dead is that you have no heartbeat, you're not breathing, you're inanimate. Now, there have been situations where people have ended up with very low body temperature. There was a skier, I think she was Norwegian, who ended up underwater, under ice, in very, very cold water with a very low body temperature. She had stopped breathing. Her heart had effectively stopped or slowed to such a slow rate that it was effectively zero. She was resuscitated, and it was the very, very cool temperature that brought her back. But in terms of doing a sort of Lazarus moment where you go to someone who's been dead for a long period of time and then resuscitate them and reanimate them, no, there's no evidence that we're able to do that at the moment, because people die for a reason, don't they? And so if you suddenly stop working and your body has some kind of catastrophe that causes you to die, well, that's not going to go away just because someone comes along and says, right, it's time to wake up now. You've got to fix the underlying problem. And so if that's relatively easy to fix, maybe. But no, I don't think there's any evidence we're actually able to reanimate dead people at the moment. Chatting
to Dr. Chris Smith, our naked scientist, lecturer at the University of Cambridge. If you have any questions, give us a call on 021 446 0567, or you can chat to us. Questioning, Chris, is it true that a special diet can improve flexibility of tendons in older people? That comes from Chad.
Hi, Chad. Well, we know that you're only as healthy as the food that you put into yourself. If you eat a bad diet, you'll have an unhealthy body and all your tissues will suffer, and this includes your brain. If you eat well, you give yourself the best prospect of operating well. That's what food is for. It's to supply not just calories to burn our way through the day, but also micronutrients and other essentials in order for our body to repair itself. Because life is a dying process. We clap out our bodies every day. Whenever we climb the stairs, you're doing damage to your tissues, but it's good damage because it provokes repair, but you need the raw materials to do the repair. And so it's certainly true that if you supply your body with all the right things, you have the best prospects for the longest and the healthiest and the best quality of life. If you have deficiencies in your diet, then those processes will be impeded and impaired, and you will have lower quality of repair and therefore lower function. And therefore, if you do have deficiencies in your diet, taking certain supplements or making sure you have enough of things can ensure that you stay as healthy as you possibly can. You can meet your full potential. Good examples of this in the elderly, people are quite prone to muscle wasting, so making sure that you stay active and have enough protein in your diet so that when you are active, you can maintain and build muscle. The other thing that happens to older people is as we go beyond the age of about 30, we start to lose bone mass. And once you get to about your 70s, some people are into a regime where the bones are so thin that they can suffer pathological fractures. This is osteoporosis. And so people who are at risk of this, and this is more often women than men, but men can also develop osteoporosis, and it happens to everyone as we get older, making sure you have adequate supplies of calcium in your diet and vitamin D in your diet to help support your bones is also really, really important.
Chatting to Dr. Chris Smith, our naked scientist, this morning, and that particular question about whether or not a specific diet will keep you a little bit more supple when you get older. Chris, what is a hiccup, and is there any way to stop that hiccup? There's a lot of myths to cure the hiccup, and that is what Keith wants to know this morning. I think we've all suffered at one particular stage or not about hiccups, and sometimes they're embarrassing, especially when you're on air and you got the hiccups. It becomes a bit difficult.
Oh, that's never happened to me, actually, thank goodness. But do you have a remedy if this happens to you, when it happens to you, because it clearly
They are
has?
just
How do you deal with it?
yeah.
What's your solution?
There's a whole lot of there's the one says grab some sugar. The other one will tell you to sort of hold your breath for a little while when you have the hiccup. And I don't know. There's a whole lot of sort of old wives' tales about how to deal with the hiccup. But you're going to give us the scientific answer for that.
Yeah, you're right. There's things like drinking from the wrong side of a glass, drinking upside down,
Hmm.
standing on your head, getting a fright. Some of these things do actually work. And the reason they work is that syngultus, which is the fancy medical term for having hiccups, is a spasm of your diaphragm. That's the big muscle which connects or separates your abdominal cavity from your thoracic cavity. It's what you contract in order to lower the pressure inside your thorax, where your lungs are, in order to push air in and inflate your lungs. And when an aberrant barrage of nerve impulses goes down the phrenic nerve, which supplies the diaphragm, it causes the diaphragm to contract, but also your vocal folds, your glottis, is closed, and so you get an inrush of air against a closed throat, and the air, a bit like a car running into a wall, suddenly stops with a hiccup. And the question then becomes, well, why should you get this aberrant barrage of nerve impulses causing this sudden inrush of air? And the answer is that in your brain stem, which is the part of the nervous system connecting your spinal cord to the top part of your brain, there are lots of important nuclei or clusters of nerve fibers, nerve cells, which control important aspects of our behaviour and function, and they do it subconsciously. They're there to regulate blood pressure. They preserve our balance. They keep the heart beating at the right speed. They control where your eyes are looking and how big your pupils are, for example. And all these networks are connected to each other, and various things, patterns of activity in one network can spill over sometimes into adjacent networks. And so we think that the general excitement that we experience when we're excited or worried or thinking about something, that pattern of activity that would normally be used to signal various readiness procedures so that your balance is prepared, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure is coordinated to respond to the threat. This can spill over into the respiratory system that's controlling your pattern of breathing, and it can produce these abnormal barrages of activity. So how do we get rid of it? Well, the answer is you distract yourself. Because this is generally linked to excitement or anxiety, if you do things that cause you to focus your mind on doing a task that absorbs you and takes your mind off of the exciting or anxiety-provoking thing that was causing the hiccups, then they tend to go away because you forget about them. Doesn't work for everybody, and there was one poor chap who I think the Guinness Book of World Records longest bout of hiccups was a chap in America, and I think he hiccuped for about 75 years. So thank goodness that's never happened to me. But generally for most people, doing something that takes your mind off it and makes you change your direction of your thoughts and therefore alter your arousal and excitement generally makes the hiccups go away.
Chatting this morning to Dr. Chris Smith with the time at 11 minutes to 10 o'clock. And we are chatting about all the weird and wacky and wonderful things in the world of science. Hovercrafts are used, and I've seen them in sort of many East Asian countries being used in rivers and dams. Are they absolutely safe? Is what the next listener wants to know. And if possible, for congestion, because we have quite a bit of congestion in and around Cape Town. It's one of the most congested cities in the world. So people want to actually travel from Bloberg, which is on the other side, and they can actually travel by sea towards the city center. So how do hovercrafts work, and are they actually safe, Dr. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, they are safe, and they do get used a lot. There are some places where you find hovercrafts because they're particularly suited. And as you say, places like where you have a confined watercourse and an area where you want to do a short journey one shore to the other. This makes a hovercraft very good at that. They're good for rapid transport across bodies of water, but they're not so good for carrying huge loads, lots of weight. The way they work is that you have a hull, effectively, where the people would sit, and a very large engine or series of engines. Those engines do two things. One, they drive a big fan system that diverts air from outside down into a skirt. So it effectively blows the bottom of the hovercraft up a bit like a bouncy castle and deflects air down towards the ground. So the skirt inflates and then air rushes out the bottom and creates against the ground a cushion of air. So the hovercraft is sitting on a cushion of air separating it from the ground underneath. This minimises the resistance or drag on the ground, and then the fans which are pointing backwards create a current of air, a bit like the engines on an aircraft. As they're flying through the air, you're pushing air backwards, so you get a push in the opposite direction. And you guide that airflow across rudders, which deflect the airflow a bit like the rudders on a boat, so that when you push the air in a certain direction, again, it pushes you in the opposite direction, and this is how they steer. So they're very safe. It's a very good process, and as long as you don't run out of fuel and stop the thing in the middle of the sea, you're going to be absolutely fine. They've got various ways of making sure that doesn't happen or that they don't sink, but that's basically how they work. So they're creating a cushion of air. The boat, the hovercraft, rides on that cushion of air, propelled over the sea surface by the air being pushed in the opposite direction out of the back, so that they are forced along.
I'm actually not sure whether this has actually been tested on that section, because we do have the Cape of Storms, which is a very difficult part to negotiate. I think on a river it would be quite fine, but when you have choppy seas and stuff like that, it becomes a bit of a risky thing to do. But Jonathan is on the line. Jonathan, good morning. Your question for Dr. Chris Smith.
Morning, Chris. Now, tell me when sometimes when you want to yawn, but you can't yawn. There's something instead of in your chest or it's in your stomach, a lot of diaphragm. You feel the need to yawn, but you just can't yawn. What do you do to overcome that? That's the first question. The second question is, with Bernouilli was born in 1700. He qualified as a medical doctor at the age of 20, and he had many other interests as well. And one of them is airflow. And he says that with an increase in velocity, there's a decrease in pressure. Now, he's talking about static pressure. Static pressure is measured at right angles to the surface over which the air is flowing. Now, I'd like to know, why is there a decrease in pressure with an increase in velocity over a surface of a wing or something like that? What is the reason? Why is there an increase in velocity? I've sort of had a look around and I could never find what the reason is. Could you persuade?
Jonathan, thank you so much for your questions, actually. The ones
Right.
about yawning.
The yawning one first. Let's do yawning. I've never heard of anyone say they can't yawn. You never yawn on this program, of course. That would be one reason why no one yawns, because it's too exciting. I'm just joking. I'm sure the odd person does. Because as soon as we start talking about yawning, what happens? We feel this instinctive desire to yawn. And this is part and parcel of probably our evolutionary origins, which is, as a social species, we watch what everyone else does. And if someone's looking a bit tired, the chances are we're feeling a bit tired too. So if they start to yawn as a wake-up signal, we start to yawn as well. Yawning is an alerting effect. The reason it gives us arousal and makes us wake up again is, or one theory, is that yawning drives cooler air over the blood vessel plexi in your head, helping to cool your brain down, because a tired brain is a warmer brain. And if you drop brain temperature, you do increase alertness. And so yawning helps to boost alertness in a tired individual. And in order to keep a group awake, we tend to copy each other. So if one person yawns, the other members of the group infectiously yawn. They catch the yawn. It's contagious, because that way you increase the arousal and the alertness of the entire group, increasing the likelihood that at least someone will stay awake long enough to spot that saber-toothed tiger coming to try and pick you off and make you its lunch. Now, I wasn't really clear about the second question. I'm not really sure what's being asked, and it was a very poor line. But I think it's related to velocity changes and pressure changes as fluids flow over surfaces. A lot of people invoke this kind of thing to talk about wings and how wings work and Venturi effects over carburetors and so on. When air blows over a chimney, the top of a chimney, for example, or the top of your carburetor in your car, then as the air blows through, you get a change in pressure behind the air, which will have the effect of creating a draft pulling air up the chimney. That's when we say a chimney draws, because the passing air reduces the pressure over the chimney aperture, and the lower pressure then draws the smoke up. The other reason why you might think about this is with an aeroplane wing, but there's an easier way to think about how aeroplane wings work, which no one will ever get wrong if you hear it explained this way, and it makes it much easier to understand, which is that aircraft wings work by pushing air downwards in the case of the lower surface of the wing, because if you look at the wing shape, it's curved from the front down towards the back, so air flowing under the wing is pushed downwards as it goes across the wing, and if you push air downwards, it pushes back on you equally hard in the opposite direction, in other words, upwards, so you get lift from the wing, and the top surface of the wing is curved, and as air goes, or any fluid actually goes over a curved surface, it sticks to it. That's called the Coanda effect. So the top curved surface of the wing has the effect of pulling the air down onto its surface and then directing it backwards and downwards. And if you pull air downwards, it pulls up on you equally hard upwards. So you generate lift from the bottom and lift from the top surface of the wing. And in that way, you generate lift by your wings, and that keeps your plane in flight. And most people listening to this will say, well, then how does the aeroplane fly upside down? And the answer is that the pilot, skillfully, when flying an aircraft upside down, will adopt a really high angle of attack. In other words, they put the nose of the plane really, really high, so even though the wings are curving in a really inefficient direction, the front is still higher than the back, so the wing will still work to have this effect of driving air downwards and backwards, creating some lift.
Kane wants to know, and this is something I'm going to try at home. He says, I've noticed that if you make a hot drink and tap the spoon repeatedly on the bottom of the mug, it sounds like the pitch of the noise this makes continually goes up in pitch. So if you bang, 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 the pitch goes up. Is there any explanation for that, Doctor?
Yes, the reason for this is that fluids which are hot, your hot water that you make your hot drink with, are less dense and less viscous, less sticky than cooler, denser fluids. And because they're less dense, they have a higher resonant frequency. They can move more easily, they vibrate more easily, the particles, and because they vibrate more easily, they resonate with a higher frequency, in other words, a higher pitch. You can do the experiment yourself. If you go into the shower, turn the shower on in the morning when it is cold, and listen to the water splashing into the shower tray. And as the shower warms up and the flow of hot water begins to arrive, I'm assuming people have got showers that are old-fashioned like mine that take about 10 minutes before the water's warm. When the warm water arrives, you will hear the pitch of the shower change as the water splashing down into the shower base is now warmer because it's less viscous and therefore has a higher resonant frequency. It's the same reason with your mug. You are changing the resonant frequency because of the increasing temperature.
Question very quickly, Doctor. Morning, Dr. Chris. Are there, and I'm going to spell this because I guess it sounds like tardigrades, TARDI grades, on the space station, the ISS.
Tardigrades are also known as water bears. They're microscopic organisms, but they're really tough creatures. They're tough old cookies. Amazingly, they can withstand being exposed to the vacuum and radiation of space, and more than half of the population in experiments people have done survived a period of exposure to space. So yes, they have been flown in space. Yes, these experiments have been done. I don't know if they've got any tardigrades up there right this second, but these are important experiments to do because we can understand how resilient life is, and also how life might have got started on the early Earth and how even it might have arrived on the early Earth. Some theories of so-called panspermia are that certain really tough cookies, really robust forms of life, made it to Earth from elsewhere in the universe, and they seeded life here rather than life getting started from the get-go. That's just a theory, but interesting to consider these sorts of questions because space offers us a chance to explore the feasibility of life spreading between planets, and therefore how our actions might also contaminate other worlds, and why we therefore need to be careful.
Hope that answers your question, Kane. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Chris Smith, this morning. And of course, it's come to 10 o'clock, time for the latest Eyewitness News.